United States Air Force bolsters its active duty aircraft squadrons with the forces of the Air National Guard. This video ordnance program explores the Air National Guard through the eyes of one of its units, the 174th Tactical Fighter Wing, better known as the Boys from Syracuse. With the waning of the Cold War, air forces around the world are reconsidering their peacetime organization. Can they afford to keep all their units on full-time duty? The United States Air Force has long experience with another alternative, the Air National Guard. The Air National Guard squadrons are based around part-time pilots and ground personnel, augmented with a small full-time corps, making them more economical in peacetime than active units.
The Air National Guard is one of three components of the United States Air Force. There's an active component, an Air Force Reserve, and the Air National Guard. And together, under the total force policy, we follow parallel paths of training convergent to the same destination, which is to be prepared to be called to active duty and deployed to an area of military interest in the United States and perform our mission effectively. And that, of course, is what happened during the Desert Shield, Desert Storm experience. Total force worked very well, in my opinion, for the United States Air Force in all mission areas, including the fighter mission represented here at Syracuse. The Air National Guard is represented in virtually all of the Air Force missions. The sole exception that I'm aware of at this moment is the Strategic Nuclear Forces. We're represented in air refueling forces, but not the strategic bombers. And virtually every other Air Force area and weapons system is represented in part by the Air National Guard. In terms of differences between the components within this total force, I think the principal one is that the workforce in the National Guard tends to be more stable. We don't undergo a transfer from unit to unit on a periodic basis measured in terms of several years. And so that stability enables the experience to be brought forth to the mission with a lower requirement for ongoing training. At the end of 20 years, an active duty person and an Air National Guard person have probably flown the same number of hours, but the active person did it very intensely for a while and then was assigned away from a flying assignment, whereas the Air Guard person did it at a lower rate throughout that entire period. It's a little bit like the tortoise and the hare, only in this case, both the tortoise and the hare arrive at the 20-year point with approximately the same experience at the same time, just achieved under slightly different circumstances.
Typical of the Air National Guard are the F-16 squadrons of the 174th Tactical Fighter Wing, nicknamed the Boys from Syracuse. The pilots of the Air National Guard come from many walks of life. Many were regular Air Force pilots who left to become airline pilots. Now they fly with the Air National Guard in their free time.
I got out in February '81, and I lucked out really as far as getting an airline job right away. And I flew for the airlines for about a year, and of course that's what I still do right now for a living. That's been 10 years ago. But what motivated me to get back in the Guard, I took a year off just to see if I was going to miss the flying and the camaraderie that's involved in the fraternity of fighter pilots, and sure enough I did. So I was definitely motivated to get back in and flying fighters. And Syracuse, New York, I heard a lot about it. It's a fantastic unit, and I joined this back in February of '82. I flew A-10s until we got the F-16 a couple years ago. So I was definitely motivated to get back in as far as not only, for retirement for somewhat selfish reason, but also just the fun of flying fighters and also the camaraderie involved with the fraternity of fighter pilots. That's a big part of it, and a lot of people don't really talk about that, but it is definitely a big part of it, especially in the Guard, because you're going to fly with guys here for the next 8 to 10 years, and you definitely get to know each other as you fly and transition to different aircraft and do different missions or whatever. As far as the number of pilots here in a unit, there's a lot of airline pilots, and I think it's typical of most units. Our unit probably has, if you take the Guardsmen, the part-timers, I would say 80 to 85% of them are airline pilots. And out of the entire unit, counting the full-timers and the part-timers, probably around 60 to 65% would be the figure you'd look at. And, you know, I mean, not all of us live here. We commute in, which is relatively easy when you're an airline pilot. Myself, I live in Newark, New Jersey. We have guys living in Chicago, domiciled out of Chicago. We have a gentleman that lives in Detroit. We have a guy that lives in Memphis, Tennessee. And, I mean, they're spread out all over the country, and it makes it easy to be an airline pilot, to commute in where you can use the airline and all that. But it's not that easy. I mean, sometimes I find myself flying with the airline, flying with the guards, you're working, find myself having stretches of days, 15, 16 days at a time where you're always flying. I mean, I come up here, I fly 2 days, I'll go home, I'll fly a 3-day trip. I'll come back up here, I'll fly another 3 days, go back home, fly a 3 or 4 day trip. So it's not as easy as it seems, but it's much easier for a guy like, we have lawyers in here, we have a highway patrolman in the unit, and I don't see how they do it, to tell you the truth. If they're working a 5-day-a-week, 40-hour job, it's pretty difficult. But the lifestyle is fantastic. I mean, I can't beat it. I got the best of both worlds. I fly the airliners on the weekend normally, or during the week, and come up here and fly fighters. I'm very fortunate. There's a lot of guys who like to be doing what I'm doing.
Not all of the pilots with the Air National Guard served in the active duty Air Force, nor are all of them airline pilots in civilian life.
I'm a part-time flyer for the Guard, what we call a guardsman. In civilian life, I'm an attorney, work for an environmental consulting firm, and that's where I spend 40 hours of the week. And then at least twice a week, I'm out at the Guard flying F-16s out here. I've been doing this for the last 10 years, joined the Guard right after I got out of college. Back when I was in college, I gave my dad a call and told him that I had just interviewed with the Marine Corps, and that you know, they had given me all the tests in order to sign up for their aviation program. And he said to me, "Don't sign a thing. Get home this weekend. I want you to meet somebody." And he introduced me to Bill Walsh, who was another attorney in town, who has been a pilot out here for a long time. And Bill brought me out, showed me around, showed me what the Guard was all about, showed me that it was a great opportunity for somebody who had civilian interests and yet wanted to fly in the military, because you could fly part-time, still have your civilian career, and really get a lot of the benefits of the military without some of the downsides. The way it worked out is I came back, I interviewed with the Guard, I passed a physical, and then they sent me to officer school and to pilot training. And the one nice thing about the Guard is that you know the base you're coming back to. You know you're coming back to Syracuse. You know you're coming back, at that time it was the Fly A-10s, the guys that are going out now, know they're coming back to fly F-16s. We like to take people in the local community if we can, because they have a commitment to the area, they have a commitment to the Guard, and we know they'll stick around. So it's it's actually a very well-kept secret, and I'm glad I found out about the secret back before I joined the Marine Corps, because it's worked out exceptionally well for me, being able to stay in the community I grew up in, fly airplanes, and really serve my country at the same time. So it's the Guard, I think, is something that we have to really emphasize for our total force in the future, because it's a very economical way to get good quality trained pilots, as we saw in the Gulf. The South Carolina unit and the Syracuse unit, I think, did a super job.
Pilots are only a small fraction of the personnel of a fighter squadron. Modern combat aircraft, especially ones as complex as the F-16, do not fly without a great deal of attention from the maintenance and support staff of the squadron. The Air National Guard has been able to attract a solid core of men and women whose experience often surpasses that found in active duty squadrons.
The technician workforce out here is made up of civilians that have a lot of prior military service and a lot of aircraft knowledge that they pick up while they were in the regulars. Myself, I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years, and there wasn't a civilian Marine Corps aviation center around here when I came back. So when I came back from Vietnam and got out of the Marine Corps, I came here to the boys from Syracuse. I've got 22 years combined Guard service and active duty time. So it's quite a lot of experience in aircraft maintenance. There's a lot of people out here that are real close to 15, 18, 20-year time loans in combined service and Guard time. It's a very vast, knowledgeable amount of personnel, and the career field is real good to work in. If you like working on aircraft, then you don't have, the civilians have what they call an A&P license and an INA license and everything else. And if you don't have that, this is the place if you want to work on airplanes. The Guard is the place to do it. You get good training. You can't afford to pay for the training that you'd get here at the Guard if you went out in civilian life to get it. It costs the government about, counting basic training and then into the basic career fields that you go into and the specialized fields in the aviation career field, it could cost the government up to $100,000 to train someone to work in the career field as a technician for 30 years or 20 years, depending on how long he decides to stay, to make it worthwhile to be here. You can't pay that kind of money outside to get the training and do the work that you like doing if you like working on airplanes.
The Air National Guard represents a very different lifestyle from active duty service. The Guardsmen can count on being stationed in an area where their family lives and not face the disruption in family life that comes from the frequent moves of the active duty servicemen.
The Guard is like a real family-oriented thing because you don't move around like the active. You could stay at a base 3 years and then you go on to another place. Here, you're always here. And people live, around the area. And the reason I got in is because when I was a kid, really young, my father was out here working. And I always liked airplanes, and he'd always get me out here, and I got really orientated with the base and how things went. I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And my brother's 2 years older than me, and he had already gotten into it, and I just got into it. But as far as the family aspect of the Guard, I think you get a lot of that because, like I say, they don't move around. That's another advantage of the Guard. You're right here all the time. And like when you go to basic training and tech school, you know where you're going to end up.
In spite of the motivation and experience of the Guardsmen, there has long been an underlying anxiety that part-time pilots may not be as capable as their active duty counterparts in the event of war. In 1991, that viewpoint was put to the test during Operation Desert Storm.
Yeah, that is a perception, I think, that's out there. It's called the weekend warrior. Hopefully we put that myth to bed in the Desert Storm. But when you're talking the experience level, the difference we have is that the Guardsmen, number one, they're very motivated to be in the Guard unit. That's all they want to do is fly. And we don't have a lot of additional duties for the Guardsmen when they come in. They can just concentrate on that flying. Consequently, that's basically what they can spend a full 8-10 hour day doing, is studying and flying the jet they're supposed to be training on without a whole lot of other distractions. The experience level, the other plus to that is that we don't keep changing names and faces. So we can train up a guy and set a training standard, and then we can maintain that training standard by not having to constantly retrain new people. Now we have an injection of new blood all the time. We try to keep 2 or 3 pilot training slots a year, if that's possible, and keep them filled. So we have young people coming into the Guard, but overall we probably average around 1,500 hours would be the average per man, or maybe a little bit greater than that. But the main plus is that we keep people. We keep the same people. We can train them to our standards, and then we can maintain that standard.
When the Air Force staff began to plan for air operations in the event of war with Iraq, special attention was paid to the close air support role. The 174th Tactical Fighter Wing was one of the units considered for deployment to Saudi Arabia because of its specialization in the ground attack mission. One of its squadrons, the 138th, was earmarked for Saudi deployment.
The Air Force was very interested in the boys from Syracuse because of some of our special capabilities, the most significant of which is the 30mm gun pod. We're the only unit in the Air Force that carries the 30mm gun pod on the F-16. And because it's an anti-tank weapon, and because of the capability that Saddam Hussein had and the number of tanks that he had, there was a lot of interest in our unit.
The A-10 Warthog ground attack plane was flown by the boys from Syracuse in the early 1980s. In the late 1980s, they switched to the F-16, sometimes called the FA-16, Fighter Attack 16, to emphasize its strike role.
The 174th TAC Fighter Wing has a culture of close air support going back to the late 1950s. And that culture has a lot to do with our understanding of that mission and our effectiveness in performing that mission. We performed that mission first in the F-86H, then in the A-37B, onto the A-10A, and now in the FA-16. One of the reasons that this unit was chosen to be the leading FA-16 unit in the United States Air Force was the stability of our organization and that culture, and the feeling that we very well understood that mission and could do a good job of assessing the applicability of the FA-16 to the close air support mission, and also to its effectiveness in that mission, and how it should be most properly employed. So we've enjoyed, literally enjoyed, being on the leading edge of developing the FA-16 concept. And the airplane, of course, fills the mission extremely well. It does virtually everything that its predecessor, the A-10, did, equally or more effectively. And it provides a whole lot of new performance and weapons delivery options that are just physically not possible with the A-10 aircraft.
In view of its experience in the ground attack role, the boys from Syracuse were one of 2 Air National Guard wings selected to provide an F-16 squadron to the Desert Storm Strike Force. The South Carolina Air National Guard provided a squadron from its 169th Tactical Fighter Group.
Well, first, the Air Guard trains for rapid deployment. Fighter units, many of them are supposed to be ready to be able to move in 72 hours. Desert Shield Storm was proof of some of that for the units that were called up. You don't get much warning time. You have to go and do something somewhere. But after all, that's what we train for. The whole purpose of the Guard is to, Air Guard, is to be ready for that, for any emergencies, contingencies, be ready to take these airplanes anywhere in the world on a very short notice, deploy and fight, be able to survive, feed yourself, take care of yourself. We proved that we could do it.
For the Guardsmen, the beginning of the Desert Storm mission would be an unprecedented flight, all the way from their base in upstate New York to the Persian Gulf.
We had a flight on the way over. The flight was 13 hours nonstop. We did 10 air refuelings. It was 9 hours of the flight was at night, so we flew most of it as soon as we got off the coast of Boston. The sun went down, and we flew most of it at night, so we didn't get to see the deep cold water below us. And we flew over the Med, and then finally the sun came up over Egypt, and we were almost to Saudi Arabia. We'd been up for almost 24, 36 hours, and we were somewhat relieved to see that the weather was very nice where we were going. As it turned out, however, the base that we were at had a big sandstorm, so we had to land in somewhat lousy conditions with the visibility dropped down to about a half a mile. But there we were 13 and a half hours later, nearly 6,000 or more miles away from our home base. Here we were, a short couple weeks ago, Guardsmen in civilian lives, and now we're over in the leading edge of one of our country's significant military involvements.
The boys from Syracuse were stationed at Al-Qaj Air Base along with the South Carolina Air National Guard Squadron and F-15E Strike Eagles from the active duty Air Force units. The sands of Saudi Arabia were a big change from the woodlands outside Syracuse, New York. And on the 17th of January, 1991, the air war began.
We were stationed at Al-Qaj, Saudi Arabia, which is the beginning of a huge Arab air base. But the only thing in there now is a huge runway, parallel taxiway, and a ramp. Big ramp for a parking place for all our airplanes. We had to build tents and temporary shelters for everything that we wanted to shelter. eating tents, living tents, office tents, portable aircraft hangars, portable buildings that expand trailer style. We had to put down clay to harden the ground enough that the tent pegs would stay in it. We had probably over close to 600 tents for living in. Huge tent city, about 5,000 people under canvas. In the winds, in the winter, in the hot part of the summer, we stayed in that area, and it was on the north edge of the empty quarter of the Arabian Desert. We had the normal things that go with the desert. We didn't have water. We had to truck it in. We didn't have food. That had to be trucked in. We had no munitions. That had to all be brought in. We had no fuel, gasoline. All of these things had to be flown in, brought in, or made there, including our electricity, which we ran a huge power plant with generators. It was the barest of the bare bases for the Air Force, the biggest of the bare bases, one of the most effective. We dropped, during the war, we dropped 12% of all the munitions dropped during the war, and it came out of Al-Karj. A huge munitions dump. There were 24 hours a day of activity. People worked consecutive days through the whole war, and we had constant airplanes coming in, bringing more munitions, more trucks coming in, bringing the 3 million pounds of jet fuel we needed a day. It was a constant struggle just to keep going. There were dust storms that would last a couple days at a time. There was heat, it was cold. In the winter we had frost. Then it would get up to 85, 90 during the day, and get cold again at night. So you're never always comfortable. You had to do something continually to stay comfortable. If you had to work outdoors during the heat of the day, you needed water, and you needed a lot of it. It was quite an operation. When you get done, you have a tendency to sit back and say, did we do all that? But yeah, we did. At the time, it didn't seem unusual, didn't seem any more than normal. You had to eat and do your job. But now looking back, you say, wow, it was the eighth wonder of the world. If there were 7 ancient wonders, this Al-Karj under tents had to be the 8th wonder of the world.
During Desert Storm, the F-16s from Syracuse were committed to the task of ground attack. Their primary targets were the Republican Guard concentrations in northern Kuwait. Day after day, the F-16s flew out of Al-Karj, burdened with tons of high-explosive bombs and deadly cluster munitions. A number of pilots from the 138th Tactical Fighter Squadron were veterans of the Vietnam Air War.
The missions, if you contrast them, they were a little bit different. They were a little tamer in Cambodia. I flew 63 missions in Cambodia than they were in Desert Storm. We did a lot of close air support work over there with the Cambodians, but there wasn't nearly as much threat towards the tail end of the war. We didn't have any MiGs to worry about. We didn't have any large AAA pieces, just a lot of small arms fire and probably 37 millimeter as far as AAA as big as it got. So it wasn't that much of a threat to deal with. Where you compare that with Desert Storm, a hell of a lot more threat. I mean, they had all the SAM systems, they had all the MiGs and everything else, and I guarantee you that first day we went up there was completely different than my first mission in Southeast Asia. So the threat was completely different, but other than flying combat with the camaraderie and the guys and the nervousness and the exhilaration, very, very similar. And, it's enjoyable. I'm lucked out, really. I mean, there's not too many guys flying around at my age that have had 2 combat tours. And as a matter of fact, I can remember in the base we were stationed at in Saudi Arabia at Al-Karj, I imagine there were, just guessing off the top of my head, 300, 350 fighter pilots there. And I think there were 12 or 13 of us, maybe 15, that had combat experience before. So we were the solemn ones, and all the other guys were all fired up with their hair on fire. Didn't realize that it's not a lot of fun getting shot at, but it's certainly exhilarating.
I flew in Vietnam also. I had 220 missions, 2 tours over in Udor and Thailand. And the difference I found with this one was that there were no restrictions. If we found a tactical target that was a threat to us or the Army, we could hit it, we could kill it. Where there was a lot of restrictions in Vietnam, I flew a lot of North missions. They were similar the first few days, but because of the lack of the restrictions we had, we were able to conduct a tactical operation as the military would do it. The planning was extremely thorough. We were able to eliminate a lot of that threat early on and then just conduct the war as we deemed necessary. And that was probably the biggest difference that I've seen. That this one was very efficient, very economical, I guess you could look at it from that standpoint, in a short period of time, very few losses. And I think probably the main reason was a military operation with the proper balance of political controls.
The boys from Syracuse were one of a number of Air National Guard units serving on combat duty in the Gulf War. Guard pilots flew reconnaissance aircraft, transports, refueling aircraft, and many other types. And men and women of the Guard kept the planes flying as technicians, radar operators, security police, armorers, and in many other essential roles. But it was the pilots and their aircraft that were the most visible sign of the Guard's role, and the ultimate arbiter of whether the Air National Guard concept had proven successful.
I can tell you this, I could not tell the difference in performance between an Air National Guard unit, an Air Force Reserve unit, and an active duty unit. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because you can't fly an F-16 in sort of a halfway measure. You'll die, you'll get killed. So the Air Force fighter units, Guard and Reserve units, have to be top line of what they do. What we do is we limit the number of missions they have to accomplish, so they don't do night attack and day attack and air-to-air and air-to-ground like some of the active duty units do. In the case of McIntyre and Syracuse, their job was air interdiction and close air support, and they did a superb job.
The pilots and the crew of the Air National Guard are high-tech descendants of America's long militia tradition. The tumultuous changes on the world scene over the past few years have reinvigorated this concept. An essential component of America's air power is provided by the Air Guard.